Whether you're home or away, stay connected to your team with T-Mobile, the network that covers 99% of people in America. They've been investing billions to light up their best network ever. From your backyard to a sold-out stadium, get T-Mobile's best coverage yet. Plus, with T-Mobile, you get a price lock guarantee, so they won't raise the rate of your talk, text, and data, ever. There's never been a better time to switch. Visit your local T-Mobile store today. Coverage not available in some areas. Price lock exclusions like taxes, fees, select promos, and third-party services apply. See T-Mobile.com.
Hey everyone, welcome to The Final Four is Not on the Schedule. I'm your host Eric, alongside with expert analyst Rod. Thanks for joining us on the best MSU basketball podcast featuring an in-depth recruiting, game matchup, and post-game analysis. We dive deep to give you the best tools to enjoy the Spartans and impress your friends and family. Hey everybody, this is Eric alongside Rod. We're here to talk about Nebraska as Michigan State heads to Lincoln on Tuesday night to take on the Cornhuskers. Before we begin, just want to remind you that if you want to support the show, a great way to do that is to go over to thefinalfoursontheschedule.com/support. There you can find ways of supporting the show financially, either through one-time gifts via PayPal or Venmo, or on a recurring basis through Patreon. That's what allows us to do all these extra features. Tomorrow, we're going to have on a bracketologist, a real one, someone who's actually very accurate, and we're going to talk about seeding and the NCAA tournament. We do interviews with other players, and all those things are made possible with all the extra support you guys give, so we really appreciate that. Additionally, it's because you also support our sponsors, who have been very excited and happy with the support that you've shown them, and so, continue it. We really appreciate it. I'll start with Brothers That Just Do Gutters, our friend Kurt Stauffer over on the west side of the state in the Grand Rapids area, all the way from Saugatuck to Lowell, up to Rockford, down further south. If you're in that area, he can get your gutters taken care of, because it's one of those things that you have to have. It's sort of like new brakes for your car. You got to have, if you have a home, you have to take care of the water, which we have plenty of here in Michigan. So if it's full of leaves, if you need it cleaned out, if you need it repaired, if you need leaf guards, if you need just a complete replacement like I did in my house, they can take care of it. They'll do a quick job, really nice, all kinds of different colors and selections. You can't go wrong with Kurt and his team. They're super professional and can do it really almost in virtually any weather, and they're really super impressive. You can contact him at Kurt Stauffer, Brothers Gutters. That's KURT.STAUFFER at brothersgutters.com. That link will be on the show notes here on the podcast player. And so you just look below the episode. You should see that there, and you can contact Kurt and his team to take care of you. I apologize also. I think I've got a little touch of COVID, and so I got a little bit of a cold, so I'm going to try and soldier through this. And boy, today I was at a state robotics, the state championships for Vex Robotics, all day. And when I say all day, Rod, it was all day long. It was... and I don't know if you've watched those like BattleBots. Have you watched that sort of thing before? Like
yeah,
on TV? Yeah. It's nothing like that. Let me just tell you, if it was, that would be fantastic. It'd also be super expensive. Yeah, this is basically like robots doing various tasks. It's kind of cool, but man, it's like I think it's a lot like the people I talk to whose kids go to swim meets and they're just there, all day watching diving and stuff. I think it was pretty much like that. So it was fun, but it was a long day in beautiful Flint, Michigan. So I made it, and we're going to get this Nebraska preview put out. So before we begin, I've been made the mistake of going online, and I've sort of, because of me taking over as co-host of the show, it has led me to, I guess, get more immersed in Michigan State message boards and Twitter sphere. And this has led me to get very frustrated, especially the last really month or so, month and a half. And with basically just the way a lot of Michigan State, the fan base is. And now I know you're used to this. And so for you, this is not surprising, but
it doesn't make it any less irritating to see, but yes,
it is really, really annoying. And I understand on some level, and I don't like using the word spoiled because I don't think it's really the right word that I want to describe that small portion of the fan base. I think it's a small portion of the fan base.
We disagrry there.
Right. I understand.
I think it's an accurate word, but
yeah. And
go on.
Yeah. It's sort of like, my wife's beautiful. She's really smart. She's a great mom. And she's courageous. She's all these things. But the thing is that she's there every day. Right. And so for years she's been there. And so you sort of appreciate things less over time. You get used to them. It's sort of the normal. Mm-hmm. And right. I think, Michigan State fans, for the large part, are very like that, right? Like, I don't ever start the season thinking to myself, man, I wonder if Michigan State makes a tournament this year. That'd be pretty sweet, right? You never even it doesn't even really enter your mind that that's a possibility. I mean, you think, well, disaster could occur and they don't make it. But it always has to be some sort of extraordinary circumstance, in which case Michigan State's not playing in mid-March, right? I mean, it's just it's a given. I mean, the name of the show is...
but I want to stop you there for a second, because I think we have gotten to the point now with the length of time that it has been a given, as you correctly state, that, let's put it this way. A 40-year-old, so not a young person,
right?
A 40-year-old was in the middle of high school the last time Michigan State did make the tournament. So what does that mean for what a good percentage of your fan base is?
Yes.
I don't feel that old, but the reality is I'm older than 40. And right. So I've seen, as I've mentioned here before, I went through the 80s where Michigan State made the NCAA tournament a grand total of 2 times in 10 years. Anybody my age or older knows how unprecedented this is, what Tom Izzo has done. And I guess when I think about how many people, just based on demographics, fall into the category we're talking about, where it is just what they have always known, and what that does to your mentality or your mindset, it doesn't make me any less irritated with it, and doesn't make me any less willing to push back against what I think are wrong-headed perceptions of what's going on. But at the same time, it's easy to understand how it could take root. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
So when people say things like the Michigan State fan base is spoiled, I say yes, readily, because I think it's, part of me thinks the evidence is clearly there that that's the case, and part of me thinks, how else could it be any other way?
Yeah.
Given what we're talking about.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I think what put me over the edge is I've seen a lot of people talk about how this team's really, very, or not even average. They say mediocre. They're kind of terrible. They're all these sorts of which, this is not.
They don't know the meaning of those words.
Well, right.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, as far as Michigan State standards recently, you could say, yes, they have been struggling a little bit in the sense they're not dominant in the Big Ten. However, you don't even have to be that old to recall Michigan State, being very successful. I'll pose this question to you. I know you know the answer. What is the last team in the Big Ten to go to the Final Four?
It's Michigan State.
Oh, it is 2019. That wasn't that long ago, right?
Now the problem is, then the next response will be, but the Big Ten sucks.
Yeah, right. Okay.
It's just
So there are right. There's Well, there's nothing. Then you can go cheer for a different league, I guess. Whatever.
There have been 2 NCAA tournaments played since the last time Michigan State made the Final Four. That's the truth. Only 2.
Right.
And we all know that there was, this guarantees you nothing, but there was a great degree, and our Mike Garland mentioned it yesterday on our podcast. We all know this. The year they didn't play the NCAA tournament, there was a great deal of confidence in Michigan State's camp that they were going to go back again.
Right.
I think at the very least, you'd have to have given that team a good chance to do that.
A reasonable chance. Yeah, exactly. So for those of you who, and then the thing that got me really over the edge is I read someone made a comment that it's not even worth watching a team like this if they're not going to really challenge for a Final Four.
Then don't.
So
then
right,
don't.
well, right, absolutely.
Go away. Stop doing
right.
it. Find something more productive to do with your time.
And I just
that's a real. It has a real easy answer. But you know what is irritating about that is those people don't follow through. They don't do that.
No, I know. They're people
have the courage of your conviction. Stand behind your words. Find something else to do.
You know, I've complained about the heckler behind me at Michigan State games, and you know, I don't ordinarily get bothered by hecklers, like people who get, you know, complain about the call. Yeah, I mean, I think they're, you know, funny or not funny, but just like, you know, kind of ridiculous, right? But it wasn't until the last game when he said, "Way to go, Marty." You know, when Marty, you know, dove on the floor or whatever. And my wife turned to me, she said, "You know, that's the first positive thing he said ever since he sat, you know, behind us." I'm like, oh, that's what really irritates me about this guy is not that he's always complaining. It's that he's never like positive. He never cheers. I don't even know why he's at the games. Like he doesn't seem to like enjoy himself.
I'm gonna go off on a tangent that I have gone off on more than once, I believe, on this podcast.
And then I've got a quiz for you after you're done. So
okay, and then I've got it I know I've done it in written form as well elsewhere. There are ample studies. I know this because I've read articles about this that hold the position that the average person has an inherent perception that negative views equate to a smarter view. This has been demonstrated time and time again. So it's a psychological phenomenon that people believe being critical, being negative, even in the face of evidence to the contrary, is a more savvy, intelligent, smarter, for lack of a better word, way to function in the world. And you see this manifest in every single walk of life. You see it in the world of finance with people that they'll call perma bears,
right?
Who have successfully predicted 95 of the last 3 recessions.
Right.
You see it in politics. You certainly see it in sport. I understand that this is a demonstrated manifestation of a psychological condition that is part of being human. There are also people for whom I think the idea of being pessimistic is kind of a crutch. They're afraid that if they let themselves become optimistic and things don't work out, that the pain will be greater than if they expect something to go wrong and it in fact does. And then they can always say, well, if it goes right, I can be pleasantly surprised. I can accept that this is a standard MO for a lot of people in the world. I will never understand it. It has struck me, I'm not talking about operating as a pie in the sky optimist in everything you do and not being realistic. But I'm talking about something that tilts way beyond that, and you see way too often, as I say, across every sphere of life. It strikes me as fundamentally a miserable way to exist. Absolutely miserable. I don't understand why people who function that way get up in the morning. I really don't. I mean, I'm not saying that for effect. I don't get it, because if you really think that way, why go on? It makes no sense to me. But I'm talking about something that is a much more serious and broader issue in society and in the world and among human beings, specific to this, to what we're talking about. it's one of those situations where, again, it cuts against of all available evidence. You're talking about a school that, by the way, I believe has now clearly it's obliterated the all-time Big Ten record for consecutive NCAA tournament appearances. I mean, that just absolutely destroyed it. And I think is among the 3 or 4 longest in history. It's second right now nationally behind Kansas. But I believe it's right there at the all-time, among the all-time greatest ever. So when you view things through that prism and you understand what it means, how can you possibly look at Michigan State basketball that way? I'm not saying don't be critical. We're critical here all the time. Every episode we're critical to some extent because that's what goes along with it. But in a big picture sense, are you kidding me?
Yes.
When you get to that point, the point you're talking about where it's just all negativity and that's all it is, you've broken with reality as I view it. You're no longer a realistic or serious person. So congrats.
So we're just going to go through, if you were a Michigan State fan, let's say you were another Big Ten basketball fan. We're just going to walk through this. And I had plenty of time in my hands today, and we're going to just go through it real quickly. So let's say you're a Northwestern fan or even a Nebraska fan, it doesn't matter. You've never been to the Final Four. You've never been to an Elite Eight. You've never gone to the Sweet 16. You've obviously never had consecutive tourneys because, barely ever gone. So you have a 0 streak in consecutive tournament bids. You've never won a Big Ten regular season. You've never won a Big Ten tournament title.
Nebraska, by the way, has never won an NCAA tournament game.
And there's that too.
Yeah.
So then let's go to Penn State. Now, granted, there aren't lots of Penn State fans, but never won a Big Ten title, never won a regular season title, they have no current consecutive tourney streak. They've won Sweet 16. This is all since Tom Izzo took over. So this is since 1998, right? No Elite Eights, no Final Fours. And the last Final Four, Penn State, was 1954. So if you're a Penn State fan, I'm not going to watch till the Final Four. You've been waiting a long time. And let's talk about Rutgers. Well, obviously, Rutgers is new to the league. Clearly hasn't won a Big Ten title or a tournament. They do have a tournament streak going of 2. They don't have any Sweet 16s. They don't have any Elite Eights, Final Fours. They haven't been in the Final Four since 1976. Well, then Iowa, which has been a pretty good basketball program. We both agree. I mean, they're not great, but they're pretty good. They have 3 Big Ten tournament titles, last year. They've not won a Big Ten regular season title since Tom Izzo's taken over. They only have 3 consecutive tournament appearances. They've got 1 Sweet 16 in that time period, and the last Final Four was in 1980. So they have 0 Final Fours since Tom Izzo's taken over. How about Minnesota? Minnesota has a good tradition as well. No Big Ten tournament titles, no Big Ten regular season titles, 0 consecutive tournament appearances right now. No Sweet 16s, no Elite Eights, no Final Fours since Tom Izzo's been around. And the last Final Four is 1997, which was vacated. We go to Purdue, which I don't know. I think they like basketball, Purdue. I think basketball is pretty important to Purdue fans. So if a Purdue fans can say, I'm not going to watch if they're not going to compete for a Final Four, well, how many Big Ten tournament titles have they won since Tom Izzo's been around? 1. How many big regular season titles? 4. Consecutive tournaments? They've had 7 consecutive tournament appearances. And this is a good program, right? Sweet 16s, they've had 9, a lot. 2 Elite Eights, no Final Fours. Because their last Final Four, do you remember when it is?
1980.
Exactly, 1980. Same year as
Joe
Iowa.
Barry Carroll. Yep.
Exactly. Yes. So then we go to Maryland. And this is actually maybe the trivia question. What's the last team in the Big Ten to win the national championship? Well, it's actually Maryland, even though they weren't in the Big Ten at that time, 2002. They have never won the Big Ten tournament. They have 1 regular season Big Ten title. Now, granted, that's in 11 years, right? Since 2011, I think is when they joined. Their consecutive tournament appearances, 0 because they didn't go last year. They've have 6 Sweet 16s that time period since Izzo's taken over. 2 Elite Eights, no Final Fours because their last Final Four was in 2002 with Gary Williams. Indiana. Well, Indiana's a pretty good program. They're one of the Blue Bloods, right? How many times have they won the Big Ten tournament title since Izzo's taken over?
Have they? I don't think they have. Yeah.
0. Yeah. How about regular season titles? They only have 3. They have a consecutive tournament streak right now of 1. They have had 4 Sweet 16s, 1 Elite 8, and 1 Final Four, which is back in 2002. So then Illinois has been a thorn in Michigan State's side. They've won the Big Ten tournament 3 times, so same as Iowa, quite a few. They have 6 regular season Big Ten tournament or Big Ten regular season titles. They have a consecutive tournament streak right now of 2. They have 4 Sweet 16s in that time period. They have had 2 Elite 8s and 1 Final Four. Their Final Four was way back in 2005, 17 years ago. So now we're going to get to the teams that have been there a lot, right? So Ohio State. Ohio State has 5 Big Ten tournament titles. One of them they had to vacate. They've had 7 Big Ten regular season titles, which one is vacated because of 4 consecutive tourney streaks, which I think is coming to an end this year.
Yeah.
They've had 6 Sweet 16s, 1 vacated, 4 Elite 8s, 1 vacated, 3 Final Fours, 1 vacated, and their last Final Four was 10 years ago in 2012. Then Wisconsin, 3 Big Ten titles, tournament titles, 6 regular season titles, and boy, I feel like it's got to be more than that for as much as they always seem to win. 3 consecutive tournament appearances. They've had 10 Sweet 16s, so pretty good. I mean, really good. 4 Elite 8s and 3 Final Fours in that stretch since Izzo's taken over. And their last Final Four was not long ago in 2015. And then what I think the real crux of it is that Michigan has had some success in the tournament while Michigan State hasn't. And this is what's gotten people really up in arms here in
I think that's
East
true.
Lansing. So Michigan has 3 Big Ten tournament titles. So pretty good, although they had to vacate one, right? And that was back in 98, I think.
The first one, yeah.
Yep. They have had 3 regular season Big Ten titles.
Well, that's not much.
Not terrible. Not a lot in 22 years or 24 years. 6 consecutive NCAA tournament appearances, 7 Sweet 16s, 4 Elite 8s, 2 Final Fours, and the last Final Fours in 2018, which is still not as recently as Michigan State.
Right.
So what's Michigan State done in this time period? What have they done under Tom Izzo? They've won 6 Big Ten tournament titles, more than anyone else. They've had 10 regular season Big Ten championships, way more than anyone else. The next closest is 6. They've had 24 years in a row of tournament appearances. I mean, you could say 25 because that one's vacated. We're just ignoring that. They've had 14 Sweet 16s, which is 4 more than the next closest, which is Wisconsin. They've had 10 Elite 8 appearances, which is 6 more than anyone else in the league. They've had 8 Final Fours, which is almost as many as all the rest of the teams combined. The level of success under Tom Izzo, and I get that people say, oh, well, if the floor is so, who cares about the floor? If all you're doing is just making the tournament every year, blah, blah, but if you're not doing anything with it, it hardly means anything. And I understand that if we're talking about the NBA or we're talking about the NFL, like you're just always the wild card or you're the 7 or 8 seed, because in professional basketball, you're not ever going to get better if you're kind of that middling team, right? You're like when we were kids, like the Milwaukee Bucks, right? You're always the 7th or 8th seed. You make it to the playoffs. You don't get a good draft pick, and so you're just stuck forever there because those leagues are designed for parity. But college athletics are not that way, right? If you're lousy like Northwestern, you'll never make. You could be lousy forever. There's no advantage to you losing. Whereas the one guarantee that you'll never make a Final Four is if you're never in the tournament. There's no doubt about that. And especially Michigan State, if you've been watching Michigan State basketball for any number of years, you know that really all Michigan State has to do is make it into the tournament, and then who the hell knows what's going to happen. There's every reason to think that they're going to pull something off because you know what? If you're there, you have a chance. And
I will point out that during this horrible 2 previous seasons that they've had, they were in the play-in game against UCLA, a team who, by the way, ended up in the Final Four. And Michigan State was the better team in that game.
Yep.
They lost because of, they lost for a lot of reasons, but most notably a failure to screen out on a missed free throw. Killed them. But they were the better team in that game. Last year, where quite frankly, at the end of the regular season, Michigan State was playing as badly as they ever have under Tom Izzo for a sustained period of time, in my opinion. You go back to those late season losses at Michigan and at Ohio State, those games were just off the charts bad. And yet that team responded with a good 2-game run in the Big Ten tournament, then went out and beat a very capable Davison team in the first round of the tournament, and were dead even, or maybe even had a lead at the under 4 timeout against Duke in the second round. So these horrible, the worst seasons anybody's ever seen from a Tom Izzo team, that's what they've done. Both occasions, they were pretty decent by the end of both of those years. 2 years ago, I'll remind people, MSU had to go down that stretch with almost no time in between the games and beat top 5 at that moment teams in Michigan, Illinois, and Ohio State.
Yeah,
just to get into the tournament.
Yeah, they had to fight like to get in. Yeah.
That team was a good team, not a great team, but a good team at the end of the season. Last year, by the time they got to the tournaments, they were a good team.
Mm-hmm.
This team, I think, is better than either of those. Where it goes from here, we'll see. But I think they've got every chance, partially because of who they are and partially because of who everybody else in the country is. I think they've got a legitimate chance to make things happen, and that's no guarantee. But in my opinion, you'd be foolish to write it off.
Right. And and as you mentioned before, I'll just reiterate, we're not slappies. We're definitely supportive of Michigan State. It pains me when they lose. I don't like watching them lose. Although I will be honest that when they lose, it does not bother me as much as when they lose in the NCAA tournament, because then the season's over. And that's the loss that really hits me hard, which is partly a reflection of the fact that I know they're going to make the NCAA tournament. And so I'm like, yeah, they lost to Iowa, which is, that was a painful loss to watch. But I'm like, yeah, they'll still make the tournament. And in some ways, I kind of don't care in some way, because I'm like, they're still going to have a chance, right? I know that it's not like the season's not going to be over because of that game.
Well, here's the thing, and from time to time, I'll just speak for myself. I get accused by certain idiots as being someone who is automatically defends what the program does, is never critical of anything Michigan State basketball does, blah, blah, blah. If you pay attention to any episode of this podcast over the entirety of the time it's been done, you will find critical statements that are made by me about some aspect of what the team is doing. And that's where I get to. Be critical, because there are always things to be critical about. The national championship team, there were things to be critical about,
Yeah.
But be smart about it. Don't when you just blanket throw out kind of along the lines of what you were talking about, this whole, well, it's so painful to watch this team. This team can't compete for Final Fours. What's the point? Okay, then you've given me complete permission to not take you seriously.
Right. Yeah.
I'll go back to this Iowa game. A lot of people, a lot of people are focused on the way that Michigan State played out the last Iowa possession of regulation, that they didn't foul up 3. Mm-hmm. And there is and I asked Mike Garland about it on our post game, and he answered the way I figured he would. It is a legitimate point for debate. Okay. There is an argument, absolutely, that you can make in favor of fouling in that situation. My problem is a larger percentage of the fan base than I would like to see, that I saw, particularly on social media and on websites that I participate on, is convinced that there is only one correct answer in that scenario.
Right.
That's untrue. Over the last couple of days, I've been reminded of something that a former high school basketball coach in the Lansing area named Steve Finnemore did. And I do remember him doing this because he would talk about it on his Twitter feed. He charted for years that exact situation, up 3, foul or defend, and what the outcomes were. And Jim Comparoni, guy who runs Spartan Mag, brought this up and confirmed with Steve Finnemore after the Iowa loss that what he had thought was the case was in fact the case in terms of what Steve found, that the reality is there is virtually no difference in terms of the success rate between which of those two paths you take, which again is the very essence of what would be a debatable point, right? I further found an article, it's 10 years old now, but I don't think the fundamentals are any different. Ken Pomeroy, whose numbers we use all the time, Ken Pomeroy did an article researching this. He had, I don't know, there was something like between the two approaches, maybe about 1,000 games that he had looked at. And the percentages were extremely close, but you know which way had the slight, and by slight, I mean like by about a percentage point edge in terms of winning percentage? Defending. Mm-hmm. He was surprised by it because he thought intuitively it would go the other way. Well, it hasn't. We're talking real world outcomes. Who wins the game?
Yeah.
So there is a discussion that can take place about which philosophy you choose to employ under that scenario. Okay. I would further argue that there were a lot of specifics in this game that made it tougher. One of the bigger ones being that it was a live ball situation. You weren't coming off a timeout, where you weren't coming off a stoppage and play where you can get your guys together. Because I maintain the thing that always gets left out of the equation in these discussions is you are dealing with college kids. When you do have a timeout and you are instructing players to foul a certain guy or to foul or not foul in a certain situation, how often do we see mistakes made in that, where you see a player and a coach exasperated by something they did? Way more often than you'd hope. Okay. And then if you're going to tell me that you should be able to do that from the sidelines in a live ball situation and get that executed properly, you got a lot more faith than I have.
Yeah.
It's one thing to talk about it from the sidelines. It's another thing to actually execute that properly. Because there's all kinds of risk that comes with it. You foul a 3-point shooter.
Sure.
You know, that being just one of them. But in any event, it's not a dumb thing to debate. The outcomes are very close. It is a dumb thing to insist that there is only one answer.
Right.
And you know, again, you could talk about the particulars here. Iowa was red hot from 3. Okay. You can say, well, that suggests they're probably going to hit it. Or you can look at the math and say there's always a reversion to the mean coming at some point. They're due to miss if they've hit 4 in a row, right? You can view it either way, and either view, I think, has credibility to it. You can look at the idea of the strategy, which I mentioned when we talked to Coach Garland. With the way Michigan State was defensive rebounding, even if you got Iowa to miss one of those 2 free throws, if you intentionally fouled them, who's to say MSU comes up with the rebound? I mean, it's just the only dumb thing is to insist that there's only one answer in this scenario. And yet I saw a lot of that. Worse yet, from my view, and this gets back to what we're talking about, the ability to be critical while actually being cogent about it.
Yeah.
There were absolutely plenty of things to criticize about the way Michigan State played that last minute and a half, minute 40 seconds, whatever it was. The foul or not foul thing was way down my list. Even if I was an adamant foul guy, it would be way down my list. The inability to get a defensive stop, because as Coach Garland talked about, MSU consistently was messing up their switching. And consequently, Iowa, I think of all those threes they took down the stretch, I think only one was properly guarded, and they happened to hit it. McCaffrey's three was well contested, and he hit it.
Yeah.
Other than that, Michigan State's defense was a problem down the stretch. Shouldn't have been that way because they had a small ball lineup in. That's, as Coach Garland talked about, that's ideal for what MSU wants to do down the stretch of a close game. It's the ability to switch 1 through 5, which you can do playing that lineup, and yet it didn't work. MSU's inability to grab even one defensive rebound when they had to have it. That was a big problem because on the rare occasions that Iowa missed a shot, they got a second chance, and they weren't blowing that, not the way they were going. MSU had 2 turnovers. One of them, you could say, was possibly a bad call. The other one was a bad decision, a bad play by AJ. So that hurt. Both of those possessions hurt. So there were a lot of things that to me made that foul defend decision not worth the amount of focus that it got from the MSU fan base. I understand this is human nature because it was the last play of the game. I get it. But the same things that people who believe in analytics talk about all the time, which is a play made in the first half is just as important as a play made in the second half. They apply here, but I think particularly a whole bunch of plays made in the final minute and a half were just as, if not more important, and I would argue collectively much more important than one shot at the end of the game.
No question. And I think, it was a very painful, and it doesn't make it any less painful to know that, the way that happens, the way, transpired, it was probably a 1 in 10,000, outcome. Like the chance
for
of that
everything that had to
for
happen,
everything to happen.
Yes.
Yeah. It was virtually impossible, which is why you virtually never see something like that. But we saw it. And the thing I would point to is like, well, one, it's on the road. So it's not like, as from an analytic standpoint, from a net standpoint, it's not as bad as if it was at home.
Hey, I got news for you, and for everybody who's listening to this, who was broken up about the loss, which counts me. I mean, I think everybody felt it. Michigan State actually moved up.
Yeah, right.
They are now number 28 in KenPom, which is the highest they've been. God, probably since the Kentucky game. I'd have to go back and look.
Yeah,
but it's been a long time, and they're the highest they've been in the net as well. So they actually benefited from that performance.
Probably just because they scored a gazillion points. I mean, 106 points probably helped them a lot.
Part of it, but that it was a road loss against a quad, I believe, quad one opponent. So you get credit for all the things positively that Iowa's done as well, just by playing them. This is an illustration of what we've been talking, or what I've been talking about.
The Ohio State syndrome.
Well, but no, more significantly, this whole not playing Minnesota thing.
Sure.
Tom Izzo wants to play the game, so I'm behind it, from that perspective. But honestly, Michigan State probably benefits from not playing it from that perspective. You don't get it. Playing Minnesota is almost a no-win proposition. Right. The way they are rated this year, it is equivalent to playing,
It's a bad Tennessee,
Southwest Tennessee Tech. No, it's a really bad back school. Yeah, it's equivalent to a November, December bye game at home, especially because it's at home. That's what it's like. It's not like playing Northwestern in a typical year, or Penn State or Nebraska. It's way worse. So, and the Iowa game is the other side of that. You go in, you lose that game, you actually benefit from it.
The disadvantage, of course, is that I have one less home game I get to go to, one less opportunity to eat an ice cream sandwich, and one less opportunity to watch potentially Steven Izzo score. I think that would have been pretty cool.
Right.
And on the bright side, I mean, most likely because of that, Michigan State is not likely to get a double bye in the Big Ten tournament, although who knows right now, the Big Ten's crazy. So I get to watch an extra game in the Big Ten tournament watching Michigan State. So hopefully in that sense, it's a win, I guess. And so, all right, let's talk about Nebraska since we got all that away, but I had to get that off my chest because it's been driving me nuts. So Nebraska, interesting team, much like last year, especially at the end of the season. They've gotten better. They're 15-14 overall, 8-10 in the league. Easily their best season under Fred Hoiberg in the Big Ten. They're number 93 overall in KenPom, 171st on offense, 56 on defense, which is a huge improvement over last season where they were 178th on defense. They've been much, much better. And they've been doing really well. They've won 4 in a row, 5 of the last 6. I mean, last one was, of course, at Minnesota, which, everybody beats Minnesota. And previously they had lost a lot before that, including losing at Michigan State by 18.
That kicked off a 2-7 run that preceded this 5 of 6. So they've been very streaky.
Yeah. So they've, as we mentioned from last year, they lost they've lost some players actually this year, in addition to, the turnover of the roster like usual. They lost Emmanuel Bandamel and Juwan Gary to injury. Offense, they can't shoot threes. They're 31.7%, which is good for 298th overall. But they're 73 from 2, sorry. They are better shooting at home. They're 33.4% at home. Turn the ball over a ton. They're number 213th in turnover percentage. Offensive rebounding has really been terrible since they started playing Big Ten play. They're currently at 288th. They don't shoot free throws very well, 63.7%. They're one of the worst in the country. And but on defense, they are better, and so that's why they've been competitive and won some games. They're 152nd against twos, 121st against threes. They generate some turnovers, not great. They don't foul their opponents very often, and they've really slowed the tempo down. They're 202nd in tempo, and so that makes their offense pretty low because they're not getting a lot of points. The one difference really since this winning streak is they've started shooting a little bit better, especially Kisei Tamananga has played a lot better too, and so he's propelled them to a lot of wins. I mean, somewhat schedule dependent, and they've won many of those games at home. But anyway, they're actually pretty good at home. What are they, like 13-3 at home? So they're tough in Lincoln.
Yeah, it's remarkable to me that this stretch where they've won 5 out of 6 has happened since they've lost 2 starters. It wasn't just 2 players; it was 2 starters. Juwan Gary. I mean, their offensive rebounding, when the MSU played them the first time, I went back and looked at the notes. We were talking about them being much, much improved as an offensive rebounding team, something they'd never done well under Hoiberg. Well, that's fallen off a cliff since Juwan Gary. I mean, it was already trending down anyway, but Juwan Gary himself averaged more than 2 offensive rebounds a game. So they lost him. They're going ultra small now in their starting lineup, and it's just fallen off a cliff. It's remarkable to me that down 2 starters, and by the way, 2 guys who played pretty well for them. They were both good defensive players. Gary gave them really an answer at the 4 that they have not had. It's been a long search for Fred Hoiberg at 2 positions, point guard and power forward. And Juwan Gary was far better than what they've had out there previously. And so missing those guys, when those guys went out with season-ending injuries, if you had asked me what's going to happen in Nebraska's season, I would have said, prepare for a 3 or 4 win year. And instead, they're not. I didn't glance. I don't know if you have their schedule up. I don't know who their last remaining game is next weekend is with. I'm assuming it's on the road since they're at home for this one.
Yeah.
So that's going to be tough, but theoretically, they could finish 500 in the league.
Sure.
And they've still got a shot to have a winning overall record for the first time in the Hoiberg regime. I mean, it's been a while now since they've even done that. So they are improved. Now, when you look at the statistical profile overall, it's still not super impressive. It's somewhat surprising that they've been able to win 8 games when you look at it, because defensively, look, they're certainly better than they are on offense, but they're only anything better than mediocre in one area. They are one of the 5 best teams in the country at avoiding fouling. They do not put opponents on the free throw line. So that has helped cover up some other things that are much more mediocre. The way they guard people, defensive rebounding. They're not great in any of these areas, but they're at least mediocre. Offensively, they're way worse than mediocre in a lot of things. The 3-point shooting has been abysmal. It's better at home than on the road, but it's not great at home either. Let's not get it twisted. Turnover numbers, offensive rebounding, none of those things are good. Yet they're 8-10, so they're doing some things right. I think they're finding ways to make winning plays at winning time, and look, that can make a difference. When you look at Michigan State this year, yes, there have been games, you think about the Kentucky game, and there have certainly been others where MSU has made big plays at the right time to secure a victory. But unusually, when you look at their losses this year, I believe I saw, and I didn't verify this stat. I wish I would have. I believe this is true, though. Anecdotally, it felt true to me. In 7 of their 11 losses, MSU has had second half leads. So that is a knack. If you watch Michigan State, as I do, and think, I honestly think the essence of the quality of this team is at least a little bit better than their record indicates. Mm-hmm. That's what I believe at this point. I'm not saying I think they deserve to be in the Big Ten title discussion, but do I think they are a little better than their record shows? Yeah, I do. But it doesn't matter if you don't make, we just saw it, right? Against Iowa.
Right. Yeah,
we saw it we saw it against Michigan and Ann Arbor. We've seen it at other times. We saw it against Purdue at home. We can cite several, Rutgers and Madison Square Garden. We can cite several games without even thinking hard where they didn't make big plays in big moments. Well, I think Nebraska has managed to make those kind of plays in big moments enough to sit where they're sitting. But it's a huge deal for Fred Hoiberg, because even at a place where, they've got good fan support, but let's be honest, Nebraska has zero basketball tradition to speak of. I just mentioned they've never won an NCAA tournament game as a program, and they've been there a few times, but not a ton. I don't know how much pressure there was or wasn't on Fred Hoiberg this year, but it was certainly starting to get close to the end, because there was no real viable sign of progress. It was just bad. And it's been shocking to me that that's the way it's been. This team has shown signs of progress. Now, it's still surprising to me because the way they've done it is mostly via a decent defense. He still has yet to produce a really good offensive team. And if you looked at the job he did at Iowa State, it's hard to believe that he hasn't been able to do it in Nebraska, because his teams at Iowa State played fast and they were very good offensively. This one, there's been a lot of, just to get to the tempo thing real quick before we move on. This team's tempo rating is slow, certainly way slower than Nebraska has been in previous years under Hoiberg. I think they're 202 or something overall.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But most of that offensively, while they're not playing as fast as they have in the past, they're still playing reasonably fast. I think they're like 138. It's the defensive possessions. They're in the 300s, which means even if I say, well, they're mediocre in terms of, the efficiency that opponents are able to shoot against them. Like, teams are able to have some success shooting the ball. They're not a great defensive rebounding team. They don't cause turnovers, etc. They are at the very least forcing teams to use a lot of clock, which suggests that overall they're not bad in the half court. Right. And it also suggests they're forcing teams to play largely in the half court. They're not getting into the run and gun games that we saw a lot of in previous seasons, where they would just end up on the short end of that stick. That's just not happening. So it's a definitely improvement. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, so let's go through the starters at Nebraska, brought to you by brothers who that just two gutters. Again, reminder, you can contact Kurt Stauffer and mention Final Four. You get 10% off. We'll start with Sam Griesel, 6'6", senior transfer from North Dakota State. He's actually really good. He's the first really good point guard they've had in Hoiberg's had for a while.
I'm going to disagree with that. He's better than anything they've had before. I would have been inclined to buy really good back like around the time MSU played the first game against them. Some of his numbers have declined since then. He's solid.
Okay. Fair enough.
He's solid.
and as for his build, he's also built solid. He's pretty thick guy. He was all summit back in North Dakota State. He's averaging 11.7 points a game on 45, 30, and 69 shooting. Yeah, definitely his shooting is down from last time we talked.
By 6%.
Yeah, he's pulling down 5.5 rebounds a game and leads the team with 104 assists and 62 turnovers. So his size makes him a little bit tough. He's kind of like a big AJ Hoggard.
Yeah, I mean he's like 6. He's all of 6'6", and as you said, he's solidly built as well. I mean, he looks more physically. He looks more like maybe like a guy who would be a 3-4 hybrid, and maybe on a different team. If Nebraska had another legitimate option at the point, maybe they would use him as more of an off the ball guy. And by the way, talking about that deep shooting decline, that may be partially responsible as well. The fact that they have to ask him to run their that's entirely possible.
Right.
So he's being asked to do a lot, but for my criticism a moment ago, he is by far the most sound player that Fred Hoiberg has had at that position since he's been there. He had a run of I think this is the 4th different guy in 4 seasons. And every year it was another transfer. And all the guys before Griesel were these super athletic, but kind of wild point guards that, Cam Mack, and I mean, I've lost track of all the guys they've had, but they all seem to be from the same mold. They were guys who, you wouldn't trust to make any decision in your life. You wouldn't trust them to tell you whether the sky was blue. And Griesel at least is sound enough to be trustworthy. And that makes for big progress in Lincoln. It really does.
Next would be Kisei Tominaga, 6'2" junior guard, a guy who I don't even remember last season if he was on the team. I mean, obviously he was. He didn't play much.
And he was he played a decent amount, but he was absolutely wild. This is a guy who his shot selection, last year I could have actually used worst, and I would feel comfortable with that. But this is what makes him hard to cover. And you're going to go through the numbers and everything in a second. But what makes Tominaga so hard to cover is normally you have a sense in a game of what constitutes a good shot for an opponent. Sometimes a player can stretch that. In the Iowa game, for example, there was that play where Sanford rose up. He maybe did it a couple times, rose up from near the logo and drained it. Okay, that's not a shot many guys are going to take. But Tominaga, it's not just the distance, it's the timing. He would launch, 7 seconds into a possession from 25 feet. It was just, and the difficulty is this year, he's much more efficient.
Yeah.
So it creates a dilemma for you as a defender because your normal sense of what situation an opponent is going to be in where they might take a shot against you, it's totally out the window against this guy completely. So that's the problem. And he's been on a hot streak. I mean, there's no other way to put it.
Yeah, no question. Yeah, and I guess the point is like, if you try and extend your defense out and like cover a guy like the cheap suit term, now you're obviously open to penetration, back cuts, and those sorts of things, and you're out of position for switches and things like that.
And here's another interesting number about him. So last year, 2/3 of his shots were from 3. This year, it's just a tick over 50%. So, yeah, he's still a guy that you worry about disproportionately from three, but he has gotten to the point that he has used that attention to create opportunities for himself inside the arc. And he's very willing to take those shots. He's not just a guy sitting, sometimes you'll see these guys around the league where, 80% of their shots are from three. So you basically know you got to worry about them at the arc and not really anywhere else. That's not Tominaga anymore.
And I suspect that's a lot of what you see when you see someone who moves from the bench to starting, right? When you have like 10 minutes versus now you have 25, you have the latitude to have more of your game rather than coming
green light.
Right.
Green light. It is a deep emerald green for Tominaga right now.
Well, for a team that struggles offensively, obviously, because this guy's averaging 12.6 points a game, 49, 40, and 87 shooting. He's absolutely the one you want to shoot more. If he's shooting crazy and he's still making 40%, heck, go shoot all you want.
Yeah. It's wild though. I mean, I was just going to say on that point. I mean, we've talked about guys at other times this year, like Funk at Penn State. To some extent, at least at a certain point in the season, Cam Spencer at Rutgers. These guys who have very quick triggers. And even with those guys, sometimes you feel like, wow, a shot's coming out of rhythm. Right. Out of offensive rhythm for the team, and yet they'll still hit it. But Tominaga makes those guys look like a standard issue, playing it by the book, right down the middle kind of shooter by comparison. He is just wild.
So if there was a bell curve, he's on the far end of that bell curve, right?
Yep.
Comes to shot selection.
Absolutely.
Next would be Jamarcus Lawrence, 6'3" freshman guard, now in the starting lineup because of the injuries. And he's playing a lot more than he did before when Michigan State saw him in East Lansing. He's averaging almost 4 points a game on 36, 33, and 38 shooting. His playing time has doubled since the last time they played. He's almost at 17 minutes a game.
Yeah, he's definitely, I mean, and obviously those numbers aren't overwhelming, but he's more than doubled his scoring output since the first game. All his shooting numbers are improved. And he's playing a lot more out of necessity. So that's been good. I mean, the one thing that, well, I shouldn't say the one thing. Fred Hoiberg's had a lot of problems, right? But one big problem he's had is he just hasn't ever been in a position where he had freshmen that he was really developing.
Yeah.
That hasn't happened. It's just been constant portal stuff. And then when he did get a freshman, he had the kid last year. I'm drawing a blank on from Florida. What's that?
McGowan?
McGowan, yeah, Bryce McGowan. And the kid turns pro after a year. So
how dare he?
This is well, I understand it. And that was to be expected. No, they knew that was coming, but it just further buttresses my point though. This has been anything but a developmental program. So I've got to believe he's happy to have a freshman who's actually making progress during the season. And hey, this is a guy we're going to have back, hopefully for a few years, and we'll see what happens.
Speaking of a guy back, CJ Wilcher, 6'5" sophomore, averaging 8 points a game on 39, 32, and 63 shooting. And he's definitely a good defender, and he's probably part of the reason that Nebraska's a little better this year.
Well, he's another one, obviously, and he's played a much bigger role than Lawrence over the last 2 years. But he started his career at Xavier, but didn't play there. So he transferred and he had 4 years of eligibility. So he's another guy they have to feel good about. But he's had a big challenge because in that starting lineup, you look at it versus MSU, he's going to be dealing with Joey Hauser. That's a problem, And he's had those kind of issues in a lot of games because he's only 6'5". And he's really, sometimes you have a 6'5" guy and you say, all right, but that guy's got strength and he's built a little bit, he can handle it. CJ Wilcher's a guard. I mean, he really is. And he's had to play a lot of power forward since Juwan Gary went down. So they believe that the one thing that's disappointing about the season he's had is that 32% from three. I know they feel like he's a much better shooter than that, but he has just not shot well.
And finally, for starters, Derek Walker, 6'9" senior. He played well the last year, coming in from Tennessee, and he's been a really good post player. He's showed some improvement this year. He's a leading scorer and rebounder. He's averaging almost 14 points a game and 7.2 rebounds a game. He shoots 59% from the floor. He's terrible from the line at 52%, which is probably part of the reason they have such miserable free throw shooting average. And he averages, a little under 3 free throws a game.
Yeah, that's a problem, and it's weird.
Yeah,
and I don't quite understand it. Well, even if he was hitting them, for him to be as effective a low post player as he is, and only be averaging a little under 3 free throw attempts a game, that's weird. You would expect that number to be double that. You think about. I mean, if you look around at some of the big men this year in the conference, the good ones, I guarantee you will see bigger numbers than that. And I don't quite understand it, because it's not like Walker's a guy that shies away from contact. But for whatever reason, he just doesn't get to the line very much. Now, as you mentioned, the inability to hit free throws, it might actually be a blessing in disguise. If you go back to that MSU game at Breslin in January, he went 1 for 8 in that game at the line. So that held him back. He still ended up with 15 points. But, he's a guy that's given MSU trouble. He gave him trouble last year. He played, other than the free throw performance, he played pretty well at Breslin. And he's a problem, because he's one of these guys. He's not an Edey. He's not a Dickinson, where their physicality just can overwhelm you. He's just a very clever, smart player, knows how to use his body, knows how to use angles to be able to get shots off around the rim. And he's got a pretty good rate of finishing them. So he's yet another good guy at the 5 that MSU is going to have to face.
We'll then move on to the reserves. We'll start with Wilhelm Breidenbach, 6'10", 230-pound sophomore. Missed most last year with injury. He's averaging 3.6 a game, 2.7 rebounds a game in 13 minutes. He, if I recall, he hit his first 3 against Michigan State. Yeah. And then he missed everything else after that. He's shooting 38, 23, and 61 from the floor.
That 23 is actually higher. He came into the first Michigan State game shooting 17%. So
That's
he's hiked
so
it a little
bit.
Made it. He's hiked it a little bit since then. But I guess the point is he's been better in some other games too, at least marginally so. He's got a long way to go. They were excited about him as a recruit. And right now his job is just to give them, at times, they will use him at the 4 and go with a bigger lineup. He's capable of doing that. He obviously can also help get Walker some rest at the 5. He's still got a future, of course. I'm not saying anything so, but I think they probably thought he was going to be a little more efficient as an offensive player than he's been. But there's still promise, for the future.
So a second big is Blaise Keita, 6'11", 230-pound JUCO transfer. He averages about 10 minutes a game, averaging 2 points a game and 3.5 rebounds a game. He didn't play against Michigan State, and he didn't play against Minnesota, and so it's hard to know if he'll come back, but we suspect he'll probably play a little bit. He keeps re-injuring his ankle.
It's hard to know. He sat out the Minnesota game, because in the game prior to that against Maryland, he re-aggravated an ankle injury that caused him to miss the first MSU game. So MSU didn't see him. It's a problem for them, because he at least gives them, he's the one guy on their roster, at least among the guys who normally play, who are typically in the rotation. He's the one guy who has true 5-man physicality. I mean, even Walker is, maybe 6'8". They list him at 6'9", but maybe 6'8" or so. When they have games against, the Zach Edeys and the Dickinsons and those kinds of people, they're at a disadvantage, physically. And Breidenbach is not that kind of guy either. He's not really a banger. This kid is a banger, and he's also a guy that they think has a bright future. But it seems to me that it's extremely iffy that he plays.
Next is Sam Hoiberg. Kind of an interesting last name.
Now, this is
coach,
the
right?
story. Other than Tominaga, this is the story of the Nebraska season. Go on.
Right. So 6-foot freshman, obviously son of Fred Hoiberg, not the Hoiberg that was on Michigan State. So different Hoiberg. He was not playing even in the rotation. I don't think he even saw the floor against Michigan State.
He did not.
He's averaging 3.9 points a game on 59, 41, and 90 shooting in almost 12 minutes a game. He had 11 points, 6 boards in the win over Minnesota. I think, and I don't remember what game it was, at the last game, I think at Nebraska, he had a steal at the end of the game to seal it. Who was that against? Was that against Penn State or?
Not sure.
Wisconsin?
Maryland, maybe? In overtime?
Maryland, yeah, whatever game it was, that he won the game basically. I think it was Maryland. Yeah, he stole the ball and the inbound went down, laid it up. They went up 5, and I don't know, it was like 12 seconds left or something like that, and the game was over.
He is, I believe he is still a walk-on.
Can't convince his dad for a scholarship.
Well, probably he will get one now because he's played well enough. This was not expected, to put it mildly, but Nebraska had those injuries hit, and so they really needed to try and do something to lengthen their rotation. And when Hoiberg started getting real minutes, it started working. And it's huge that he's given them this lift because, as we've talked about, this is a terrible 3-point shooting team outside of Tominaga. He's the one guy that you really worry about. Griesel's okay. Lawrence is okay. They're not guys that keep you up at night.
Yeah.
Hoiberg gives them, and it's not heavy volume, but he gives them another guy that defenses have to worry about from out there. So it's truly been remarkable that he's come from nowhere to be a very positive addition to their rotation.
Good for him. Hopefully he doesn't do it against us on Tuesday. Next is Denham Dawson. 6'6" freshman wing, averaging 1.8 points a game on 35, 31, and 40 shooting in about 15 minutes. And he's played a little bit more just because of the injuries.
Yeah, he's seen he was averaging about 10 minutes a game before MSU saw them the first time, and he's up to 15 now. Again, out of necessity, they needed to do some things, bring some young guys along to lengthen that bench. And, Dawson's not super productive, but he is a guy that they think down the line could help them. He's got, he's a wing. He's got decent athleticism. They think he can be a good defensive player, and they also think he'll be better offensively as he continues to adjust. But right now, he's a guy who's buying them some minutes, basically.
Yeah, I was very disappointed because he didn't play against Michigan State. I was all set to give tell my son the joke, that basketball's in Denham's genes, but we never had the opportunity. So finally, Oleg Koznets, 7-foot redshirt freshman. He might play if Keita's ankle is a no-go. He saw 6 minutes against Minnesota, averaging only 3 minutes a game in 16 games so far, less than a point a game and less than a rebound a game.
Yeah, I think the only way he plays is if the other kid can't go. And against Michigan State, we don't think of Michigan State as a big team, certainly, and they're not. But you can see where Fred Hoiberg might feel like he needs one more big guy. I mean, Walker plays about 30 minutes a night. So he plays a lot, but that still leaves 10 minutes, right? So, you have Breedenbach who can give you some minutes off the bench, but he's also going to play some at the 4. So you probably need that one other big body in this game, ideally. Now, who knows? Maybe he'll surprise me and he'll go small ball. But that's why I think if the one kid can't go, this guy may step in just for a few minutes to try to buy him a little bit of time with legitimate size and hope he can grab a rebound or two.
Yeah, the one disadvantage, of course, to trying to go small ball against Michigan State. I mean, certainly you can, but it almost plays into Michigan State's hands in some ways. And then Michigan State has their 5 best players, best offensive and defensive players on the court at the same time.
Let's look to what happened at Iowa City, though.
Well, right, yeah.
It's no guarantee.
But it worked for most of the second half, right? Until the very end of the game, it sort of just fell apart, fell to pieces. But yeah. All right. Well, let's talk about the 5 keys of the game, brought to you by Nudge Printing, right after this.
The midway point of the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scorers and threes drained. I love mixing it up by betting against the spread, taking the over on Giannis's points every chance I get, and more exclusive bets like the 2x3, 2 threes scored in the first 3 minutes. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine bets like those for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/BlueWire. That's FanDuel.com/BlueWire to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. 21 plus in select states. First online real money wager only. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable free bets that expires in 14 days. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit fanduel.com/RG in New Jersey.
All right, so our 5 keys of the game brought to you by Nudge Printing. Nudge Printing is a fantastic sponsor of the show. They're our first sponsor, and Gabe and Brittany are doing really amazing work. Gabe just sent me a message saying that they've been one of the partners with the Spartans Strong to try and help raise money to help Spartan students with the tragedy that happened on the 13th. They've printed over 15,000 shirts and distributed them and sold them. And so to raise money.
Wait a minute. 15,000?
15,000.
Not 1,500.
Yeah. No, 15,000.
Good Lord.
Yeah. So they are.
Wow. I saw just as an aside, I think it was on social media. I saw a photo they had and it brought back some less than pleasant memories for myself, as we've alluded to once or twice here, about what happens when you get all these orders in. It's great. The problem is you then got to package them up and slap that postage on there and take them to the post office. And they had a photo of all these packaged Spartan Strong t-shirts, but I didn't realize the number was that high. That's a heck of a statement about not just them, but about the Michigan State fan base too.
Yeah, and I know they're not the only ones doing this, but I know they are actually probably the first to respond and to start, and they had to stop for a second just to make sure things were straightened out. But they have gone gangbusters. So this MSU alums, the Michigan-based, the work they're doing is really great. It's actually really great. We're blessed that they're part of our family here too, with the Final Fours on the schedule, and so it's been a great partnership. And so if you want to support Spartan Strong, you can go to Nudge Printing and find their stuff there, and the proceeds there go towards supporting that work. Also, he's going to be working on, and I think he had to stop for a second, is to try and help the Madi Sissoko Foundation. We've had Madi Sissoko on to talk about what he's doing. And so Gabe stepped up and he wanted to help out there with getting a logo and some t-shirts printed to help out the fundraising for that as well. So just great people. You can't miss by going to their stuff, and really high quality stuff too. I've got a sweatshirt I was wearing yesterday, super soft and wears great. I've got some t-shirts, which are again very soft, great prints, great logos. They also have vintage stuff. They've got, if you're house divided, you got someone went to Alma and someone went to Michigan State. You guys can both get your gear. They've got big wall stickers. They had one like big Spartan S and Sparty and all kinds of things. Check out their collection. They got all kinds of cool stuff. And if you want to buy either a shirt or a hoodie with our logo, the proceeds there go to our show, and so you can help support our show. Also, help out Gabe and his team. You can go to the finalfoursontheschedule.com/merchandise, and then it links you to the merchandise page where you can go and find the collection. And when you go to checkout, make sure you type in Final Four for the coupon code. There you can get 20% off your purchase. And so you can't miss with Gabe and Brittany. They're just doing great work. Again, that's at nudgeprinting.com. All right, so the keys to the game. The first key is defensive glass, which Michigan State has generally been really good, but yeah, they've had times where they have not been good. And so we've seen that, and it's come back and bitten them a couple times recently. Nebraska, we've mentioned before, is not great on the offensive glass, but you sure don't want to give a team that struggles offensively a second chance to score.
They're bad. They're in the high 200s. They're a bad offensive rebounding team, but again, we've seen just enough inconsistency with this Michigan State team, and boy, look at the last, say week, 8 days. They get absolutely tattooed, especially late against Michigan. But you could understand it. At least I thought it was understandable. It was late in the game. I think Michigan State ran out of gas for some perfectly understandable reasons. And Michigan was playing the kind of twin tower lineup that you don't see very often. And Terrace Reed in particular really did some damage. So, okay, really bad. I think it was the deciding factor in the game, but you can kind of understand it. They come back against Indiana and do a fantastic job of limiting that team, shutting them down on the offensive boards for the most part. We come back against Iowa, a good offensive rebounding team, not great, but good. And although they were never great in terms of the defensive boards, I felt like they held it together reasonably well until Rebraca fouled out and Iowa had to go small. And then Michigan State simply could not grab an offensive rebound or defensive rebound when it mattered, down the stretch in regulation or in overtime. The best offensive rebounder on the floor, best rebounder period on the floor down the stretch of that game was Tony Perkins, a 6'4" guard. That should not happen. So, which team shows up? Most of the time, this team has gotten the job done on the defensive glass, but there's been just enough moments. And the problem is, and I think we've talked about this before, when they're bad, it's typically not, oh, well, they gave up 13 offensive rebounds. It was a middle bad, but not, it's when they're bad, they're catastrophically bad. That's the problem.
Yeah. Like against Rutgers or where they're giving up,
Michigan down the stretch,
40+% offensive rebounding percentage. Yeah, right.
Yeah, I mean that's a catastrophe.
So the second key to the game is the three. Michigan State is shooting lights out, especially after the last game in Iowa. They're up to 38.5% as a team from three, which puts them at 14th nationally. Nebraska is better than they are on the road, but still pretty terrible. They're a little over 33%. So Michigan State has to have a big advantage here.
Yeah, to say the least. I mean, we say it every week, every game. And the reality is that Michigan State is shooting the ball well for the most part coming down the stretch of this season. I mean, they shot it like they were at 40% or right around there against Indiana. They didn't shoot great against Michigan, but they weren't horrible. And then the games before that, they've been on a run where they're shooting the ball very well. And as you say, against Iowa on the road, they were just lights out. So this has to be an area where Michigan State has a distinct advantage. If it's even or close to even, or God forbid they're at a deficit, it could be hard to win.
The third key to the game is Tominaga. So he's averaging 19 points a game over the last 4 games during this winning streak. He's, as you mentioned before, his shot selection is crazy, yet he hits them. And he's just been red hot. And he's also not just limited to threes. He does drive and shoot mid-range at times too, which they also tend to be falling. I mean, with everything right now for him. So, and with the crowd, I think he really feeds off the crowd and Lincoln too.
Absolutely. They love him. And I get it. As a neutral fan, when I'm watching them play against anybody else, I can watch it and know that he would drive me insane if he were playing for my team. But as a neutral fan where you're not emotionally invested in the outcome, he's fun to watch because it is wild. I mean, and anybody who's played knows what I'm talking about when I say this. When you're defending a guy, you have an intuitive sense of, okay, this is a spot on the floor where I can't let this guy catch the ball, and I certainly can't leave him open from here. Or, we're just into the shot clock. He's not going to just rise up and take a contested jumper. They're going to work the ball and try to get a better shot. All these things that are, I would say you can physically feel them when you're playing as to when you would expect a shot to come. They're out the window with this guy. He doesn't, it kind of reminds me of, if you remember when Steve Nash really made his breakthrough as an elite NBA player once he got to Phoenix. I'm talking like, the early aughts, mid aughts, that period. He played point guard, I thought, differently than I'd ever seen anybody else play it. It reminded me more of movement that a soccer player would use. And he had played soccer, as I understand it, growing up. So maybe not a surprise. But it struck me as very unorthodox. This is a guy, it's things that are commonplace now, where he would drive underneath the rim and pass from there. I'm not articulating it very well, I don't think, but people who saw him play, I think, will know what I'm talking about. It was a different feel to the game than I had ever seen. Even the greatest point guards, Magic, Isaiah, John Stockton, it looked different, and he played differently than any of those guys had played. And a lot of what he did has been incorporated into the game now, and you see it much more frequently. Steph Curry plays the game differently than anybody who came before him. He's another guy, although it's at least a little bit more comprehensible to me than Tominaga. Shots that are good shots for him are not good shots for anybody else. Tominaga, it feels like that to me, where he is playing his own game in his own rhythm, and it's not one that you're familiar enough with as a viewer to be able to feel it.
Right.
And that must make it incredibly difficult to try to guard him.
It's probably got to, in some level, make it difficult to play with too, right?
You
think if someone's got a different rhythm, I guess it's the longest guy scoring, but Garland talked to us last show that one of the reasons you look at Iowa and the reason their defensive efficiency is so bad is not as much because of their defense being poor, which it is, their individual defense, their half-court defense, but because they have bad shot selection, and so it leads to sort of easier offensive possessions on the other end. And you wonder, a guy like Tominaga, that you'd expect the same sort of thing. Like, as he gets more minutes, you'd expect defensively they have a little more difficulty. Although I guess if he's hitting enough of them, then
he's
it doesn't
hitting
really matter.
More. That's part of it too, is that the shots are falling. Yeah, I think that's true, and I think it could be difficult to play with him. But again, this is a team that is so devoid of offensive scoring punch, particularly from the perimeter, that they're going to take what they can get. But it's got a very strange feel to him, to watching him play, because you're just, as someone who watches basketball, I think you're used to, we all have a sense of what is a good shot. And that's why it's not just, he was open. It's more than that. It's also, is it in rhythm? Did the shooter get the ball in his pocket, where he wants to get the ball as a pass recipient, so that it's an easy, natural, in rhythm motion to go into the shot. Game situation can affect that. People always talk about somebody who hits a couple shots in a row, and then they might launch a third one quickly, and it feels out of rhythm, but he did it because it's a heat check. You have, even forget a player obviously has it, but even as a viewer, I would think everybody listening to this knows what I'm talking about. You have an understanding intuitively almost of what a natural rhythm is and what constitutes a good shot. And that enables you to also be able to almost feel when a bad shot is taken, when somebody takes a shot out of rhythm, or when it's closely contested, and they launch it anyway. This guy, you throw all those things out the window. How you feel isn't really correlating as well as you would think it should to the actual results. That's the point, I think. And that's got to make it really hard to guard him.
Sure.
Right, when he's shooting the way he is right now, especially.
Yeah, you've just got to be paranoid that no matter what you do, sometimes
you can't relax. You can't relax. There's certain that's I think the point. Like I talked earlier about Stanford, the kid from Iowa, when he came down, and I can't even remember, might have been Tyson, might have been somebody else was guarding him, and he pulled up from Christ, it was at least 25 feet. It might have been further out than that. And he drained that one. I didn't blame the MSU defender on that. That's not a good shot. That's a moment where as a defender, you are relaxed because you don't expect anybody to pull up from there because nobody does. He did, right. And he hit it. Okay, good for him. You tip your hat, and if he does it another couple times, maybe you change the way you're defending him. But this kid, those shots are going to come from every angle, in rhythm, out of rhythm. They're going to come, and so you can't relax for a half second the way you normally would if a guy is, catching a pass 25 feet from the basket. You don't, off up, and it's out of, it's not even in what would be normally a good shooting position. You can't relax because he will take those shots.
And the obvious thing too is that you have to be very careful that you're not fouling to make those shots difficult, because the guy is really good on the line shooting.
You can't 90%. Overreact. Yep.
Yeah. So a much more traditional scorer is Derek Walker at the post play. So that's the fourth key to the game. He's leading the team in rebounding and scoring. He gave Michigan State all kinds of fits this year, last game, and then even last year. So even last year when we had Bingham and Marble as defenders, he gave us trouble. And now this year, Kohler, Cooper, and Sissoko. So, what can we do to prevent him from getting easy buckets?
Yeah. I thought MSU's fives the two of them that played did a really good job against Trace Jackson Davis. They were not as good against Rebracha, but I will tell you where I did think they were good. Robbie Hummel was talking on the broadcast about how Iowa really made a mistake when they were down 13 and everybody assumed it was a loss. Talking about how it was such a big problem that he just hadn't gotten many shots in the second half. But I think a lot of that was attributable to MSU's fives playing much better defense against him in the post. I'll tell you who really impressed me. I thought in that second half, Carson Cooper had a hell of a turn defensively against Rebracha. Rebracha didn't touch the ball because Carson Cooper was in denial the whole way.
Yeah.
And never gave Iowa was not getting good, easy entry looks against him. And I thought it was really impressive. What's interesting about this game and this matchup to me, I think, is this. When MSU played Nebraska the first time, they were still mostly in conventional MSU defensive strategy, period. Mm-hmm. By which I mean mostly playing a guy in the post straight up, not sending a lot of help, and you just kind of live with the results. Since that game, we have seen Michigan State, we've talked about this here before, do more doubling and send more digs from the perimeter. Well, definitely more straight doubling than the entire rest of Tom Izzo's career combined. We've seen this year. And they've been more aggressive in digging down from the perimeter than we've seen in a few years. So I'm going to be interested to see if Michigan State decides to send more help against Walker, and then also how Michigan State's fives hold up individually against him. At the time, another point worth making, at the time of that first game, I would argue Carson Cooper and Jackson Kohler have both made strides since then, defensively.
For sure.
And so that's a little bit different as well. You've got those two to add to Madi and what Michigan State can throw at you. And then again, as I said, add in the fact that they've shown a willingness to play differently. If they do against him what they've done against a lot of other guys, kind of vary the timing, vary where it's coming from, if it's coming, and try to keep him off balance, that could maybe help. If Michigan State can make Walker at least play an inefficient game, even if he scores a decent amount, but he has to take a lot of shots to do it, it's going to be really hard for Nebraska to win. I mean, I think that's a matchup that if Michigan State can just slow him down some, make it tougher on him, they don't have a lot of other options. It's Walker and Tominaga, and that's kind of about it.
It's certainly a team that can go through big scoring droughts. You've seen it before with Nebraska. Yeah, I would say, to their points, Cooper is going to be better, I think, than even last game because that ankle should be better than it was because I'm sure Sill's bugging him a little bit against Iowa. And it is interesting, everyone always talks about stubborn Izzo, how he never changes, and yet you see his approach in the post is much different this year when you have
it's radically different.
And I guess people might make the argument, well, it's because the fives are so much worse. Sissoko's terrible, blah, blah, blah. I think it's just a reflection of just the Big Ten and where the strengths are of these teams.
Yeah.
They rely so much on the post that it is important to neutralize that as best as you can because they can hurt you. And I don't know. I mean, maybe but I don't know what Walker's like with the double teaming. Is he good passing out of it? Is he going to turn the ball over? I don't really have a good feel for
okay. He's okay. I mean, he's not Trace Jackson Davis, but he's okay.
Yeah. And then obviously you've got to watch who you're doubling off of. You don't want to double off.
That's the big thing. I think the thing that leads you to conclude, they can get away with this, is that Nebraska as a team doesn't shoot the three very well. But you've got to be careful that you're not leaving Tominaga open. So that I would think is going to be a factor in when and with who doubling comes from.
I think too with Michigan State, and the reason that Michigan State's getting away with it and doing a little more this season too is the guards are really more aware than usual for Michigan State, and they're very quick and they're able to get back and cover quickly. And even in the 4 spot, when you've got Hall there, you can rotate quickly around the perimeter if you have to. And I think you can get away with doubling a little bit more just because of that reason. I think you have the ability to sort of recover outside.
At their best, they have shown and had games where they've been very, very good in terms of recovery, getting back to shooters and being able to still contest on the perimeter, even when they're sending a perimeter guy to dig down. They've been very, very good at times in that area. There have been other games where maybe they haven't been quite as good, but overall, I think you're right in terms of what's enabled them to have the confidence to do that a little bit more.
Finally, the last key of the game is the mentality. So Michigan State's been through a lot psychologically, and obviously the Iowa loss is going to be tough to overcome. And we were talking, that was your question to Coach last show, how do you know if this team is going to be okay? He's like, you don't know until they play. He said you won't know but you'll know right away. So maybe with the first few minutes we'll see if there's a hangover effect or if they come out with confidence and start hitting shots and playing like they're okay.
Right. And I think, it's a great unknown. You would hope that there will be resiliency. This is the thing for me as I look at it. Michigan State had that stretch where they were playing really good opposition for the most part without much rest between games. And we felt like, okay, there's a physical toll that's being taken on this team, but they're going to get through that. And the schedule is going to be much friendlier as they go down the stretch, both in terms of who they play, where they're playing them, and the amount of time between games, right? Well, just as that hit, we've now had 2 weeks basically where they've gone through a lot.
Yeah.
There's the initial shock of what happened on campus. And then you go and your first game back, you're playing in Ann Arbor. You kind of bounce back from that. Your first game at home, again, a ton of emotion, but you play well and you beat a good Indiana team at home. And then we have this sort of unprecedented loss at Iowa City. If they just lost at Iowa, I don't think it would have been that big a deal. but
yeah,
the
right.
nature,
the happened,
nature of it. Yeah. And so they have been through a lot. And when Mike Garland says you're not going to know until the game starts, that's it, man. I don't need to hear anymore. So they're trying. And it was interesting to me that, when I asked him because he had said the thing you worry about is kind of the obvious thing, but I'm glad he said it. It's confidence. Does a game like Iowa cause you to lose confidence? And I think also maybe it's worth noting a game like Iowa on the back of all these other things that have tested them and have presumably taken, mental energy as well as physical energy away. All those things matter. Is there a cumulative effect? Like, where's the straw that breaks the camel's back, right? That's what I'm getting at. And, I asked him, well, how do you deal with that? Do you just focus on rebuilding the confidence, or are you still leaning on, hey guys, we did X, Y, and Z miserably at the end of that game. We got to correct this. And he said, as I would have expected him to, it's a combination of both. So we're going to find out. We're going to find out how effective that, Coach Izzo kind of putting, leading the team to the couch in the psychiatrist's office is in terms of getting this team ready for another road game against a team that's playing very well and see how they can respond. But I think it's a big factor, and it's an unknown. We just don't know.
So Nebraska will finish up the season at Iowa on Sunday. And,
okay, so they're probably not going 500, but you never
probably
know.
Not. Yeah, probably not. This is a game that's not a must-win for Michigan State. I think, we probably both feel comfortable that they're in the tournament no matter what happens. You'd hate to, a 3-game slide or something to finish the season. But it's not going to be an easy game, and it's a game that they're going to have to play well and to beat Nebraska.
Absolutely. They're 3-point, MSU's a 3-point favorite per Ken Palm. So even though they're on the road and Nebraska's only whatever it is, 2 games behind or 1 game behind in the win column, actually, it's still a situation where Michigan State is favored on the road for a reason. Nebraska has played well, but let's not get crazy. This is a team that if Michigan State is able to, and I don't know that they're going to be able to, but if they are able to just put Iowa and everything that came before that behind them and focus, which was something else Mike Garland said, specifically about the defensive rebounding, but I think it applies to a lot of things with this team down the stretch of that Iowa game, is that they lost focus. If they are able to focus, they should have enough to get by this one.
Yeah, I'm going to guess that they are very focused, and I think they're going to be okay. And, what's interesting is when you look at the Big Ten standings, obviously not playing Minnesota, metrics-wise, it's probably helpful. When it comes to Big Ten standings, you're not playing for Big Ten championship anyway, so in that sense, it doesn't really matter. It does matter in seeding in the sense that you want to try and make it to a double bye. I think that's pretty much off the table now. Maybe to win the next. Although who knows with all the teams left what's going to happen. But I think the key to is much like the NCAA tournament. I don't know that it matters where you are in the seeding in the Big Ten. Outside of having to play on Wednesday, right? That's the one thing you wouldn't want to happen is play Wednesday, which is hard to imagine. Michigan State's never played on Wednesday before.
Yeah.
But so you want to avoid Wednesday. If you avoid that, it doesn't really matter who you play because you can beat anybody, and heck, you could lose anybody. So I think it's wide open.
Is it mathematically possible for them to play on Wednesday? They'd have to be in the bottom 4, right?
Well, I mean, I would. Let's look at the standings real quick. But I think
they've got 9 wins. They've got 9 wins. So you've clearly got Minnesota, Ohio State, and Penn State, I don't think can get to 9 now, right? Because Penn State lost tonight.
That's true. Because I was looking before. Yeah, let's see. Well, Penn State's 8-10, so Penn State could finish 10-10.
Okay, my bad.
Wisconsin could be 10-10. Nebraska could be 10-10. I mean, it's theoretically possible that you could be past it.
Okay.
Now, I don't think that's going to happen. But
I don't.
You beat Nebraska, it's off the table. You're going to be at 10-8. The worst you be finish is 10-9. You're going to be ahead of all those teams, and you're not going to be playing on Wednesday. Heck, Nebraska or not Nebraska, Ohio State won today, so they somehow beat
finally
beat
broke
Illinois. My goodness. So anyway,
I look at that as a good thing. If you're Michigan State, they got the monkey off their back in somebody else's gym. I don't suspect that they're going to put up much of a fight in East Lansing next weekend. And we know how Michigan State tends to play on senior days, generally very, very well. Yeah. They rarely seem to lose those games. So I feel pretty confident about that one. But, if you want to take the positive side of this, if they win these last two, they end up 11-8.
Yeah, I was just going to say they could theoretically be second place.
I don't know that I'm quite. Yeah, it's possible, but I do think that your point is a very good one about seeding not mattering. I would even say the double bye thing doesn't matter to me as much as it normally does, because with this team, I don't. Their year, and I'm certainly not one who believes the Big Ten tournament doesn't matter. I think that's something that Michigan State's won it more than anybody else. It's something they want to win. And so normally, you'd like to see them go on a run. All I care about with this team is that they play well. Like last year to me was just about perfect for that team.
Right.
They won a game against Maryland, I believe, and then they were right there with a very, very good Purdue team and lost, but that's okay. You came away from it. I came away from it at least feeling like, they're finally playing well. And they carried that into the NCAA tournament, and I think played very well in the two games they had. So it felt good. This team, I don't know. I certainly don't want to see them go on a 4-day run. I don't want to see that, because I think that would probably take a little more out of them physically than I would like to see. That's just my personal belief. I could, if you've got a chance to win something, of course you want to do that. But to me, the ideal thing is play at least a couple of games if you can, and that sets you up pretty well. But who they're playing, all of that, trying to figure out who's going to win this thing is insane.
It's a crapshoot.
I don't know how you can. I
mean,
even
Purdue.
What's Purdue got? Purdue's got, is it 5 losses or 6 now?
I think
it's 5, right?
I think they're 13-5.
Yeah, so 13-5, 2 games left. I haven't looked at who they play the rest of the way, but even if they end up winning it, remember we had people wondering if they were going to lose a game at all in the Big Ten, and I feel at least somewhat vindicated by what's happened. They've actually lost. If you'd asked me 3 weeks ago, they've lost a couple more than I thought they would.
So they've lost 3 of their last 4.
Yeah.
They're at Wisconsin next on Thursday.
Oh, that could be tough because Wisconsin.
And then they're home and then they home and host Illinois to finish the season on Sunday. So,
okay.
I mean, that's not impossible.
Easy. That's not easy.
I'm not saying I think they'll win, but who knows?
That's not easy. I mean, the game in Madison especially is tough because, Wisconsin had a chance today to really, I think, solidify their tournament case. If they had held on to beat Michigan at Michigan, I think that would have, not that it's a quad 1 win, but I think that would have done them some good. They didn't get it done. They lost in overtime in heartbreaking fashion, I will add. I'm not sure if you were aware of that.
I saw sort of how it transpired, but
all right.
The great thing is we're going to talk to our bracketologist tomorrow.
Right.
And so we'll go through all these sort of scenarios and things about Big Ten teams.
I want to, and Wisconsin will be a team I want to ask him about because I would think a home game against Purdue is a very big one. Everything I've seen suggests Wisconsin is right on that line. They are right on the bubble. Right. First 4 in, last 4 out. They're kind of in that range. So I would think they're going to give Purdue everything they've got in the tank. And so that's not an easy game if you're Purdue. And then home against Illinois. Illinois is like everybody else in this league to me. Which one's going to show up? I have no idea.
Exactly. Yeah. Neither does Illinois.
Yeah. Right. No, I don't think they do. I mean, they lost what they lost at home today to Ohio State. I mean, that's That's not a good sign.
They lost at Ohio State. We'll give them. We'll give Ohio State. We'll give Illinois a little bit of credit. They lost on the road, but
even that's
still bad.
That's not a good sign. And so you think Illinois is going to be certainly motivated to demonstrate, hey, we're ready for March. So not an easy end for Purdue. But anyway,
well, we're going to get out of here.
Yeah. Let's wrap it up.
We're going to talk about all this stuff tomorrow. Again, you guys are great. Thanks for supporting the show. Make sure you check out nudgeprinting.com for Spartan Strong, our gear, or just regular Spartan gear. Contact Kurt Software Brothers that just do gutters, brothersgutters.com. And then also you can go to the Final Four on the schedule.com/support. Find ways to support us financially. We really appreciate that, which allows us to do things like, interview a real bracketologist, not a Joe Lenardi, a guy who actually gets things right. So that's going to be a fun show tomorrow. So until next time, the Final Four on the schedule. Go green.